Senator McCain, do you see any scenario where ISIS is militarily stopped and that the Iraqis can retake ground lost to ISIS without U.S. air power being involved?
I know of no military expert that believes that without the use of U.S. air power that they will be able to anytime soon regain the lost territory, which is a sizable part of Iraq.
Did you hear President Obama say it's unacceptable for radical Islamists to have safe havens in Iraq and Syria? Did you hear him say that?
No, I did not, but I did hear him say on December 14, 2011, we're leaving behind a sovereign, stable, and self-reliant Iraq with a representative government that was elected by its people, and other quotations throughout the
My point
campaign.
is, don't you agree he's right? It is not acceptable for our national security interest for ISIS to have a safe haven in Syria and Iraq that could run from Aleppo to Baghdad, that's not a good thing for us.
I totally agree.
Well, if it's not a good thing for us, how do you change it? Give me a scenario where we put these folks on the run in Syria and in Iraq without American air power. Give me a scenario where political reconciliation in Baghdad has a snowball's chance of hell of succeeding as long as they're losing on the battlefield. Give me a scenario where the battlefield turns our way without U.S. air power. I can give you a scenario where it begins to turn on the battlefield. Iran comes in with great numbers. The most likely scenario to stop ISIS is Iranians getting involved with Shia militia. Does that bother you, Senator McCain?
But I'd also like to point out something the senator from South Carolina knows and I know. The air power has a psychological effect. When an aircraft flies over the enemy, they are going to do things differently if they fear that they're going to be hit from the air. As we all know, air power does not determine the outcome of conflicts, but they sure are important in the battlefield equation.
Well, is it fair to say the Air Force in Iraq is grounded for all practical purposes?
Not only grounded, but a lot of the air assets, I understand, like Apache helicopters, are in the hands of ISIS.
So, to the President, we agree with you that Iraq matters. We agree with you it's not in our national security interest to have ISIS occupy territory from Aleppo to Baghdad. But here's what's a mystery to me. How do we turn this around unless you stop their advance inside of Iraq and you go after them in Syria? And as to political reconciliation, I completely agree that that is the ultimate change that needs to occur, that airstrikes alone will not get us to where we want to go, but it's a chicken and egg concept for me. Can you imagine a scenario, Senator McCain, where we can get all the parties together when ISIS is winning on the battlefield?
That's why I was amused by various commentators who have been consistently wrong, including one in the New York Times today. All we need to do is have everybody sit down together. A total misreading of the situation.
Here's the problem with that. To go to a meeting in Baghdad, you're likely to get killed trying to get there. Who's going to sit down at a meeting in Baghdad when everybody's getting killed based on sectarian differences? So my advice would be to use American air power before it's too late as part of a coordinated diplomatic effort. That American air power is part of diplomacy. That may sound counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense to me. Diplomacy cannot succeed unless you change the momentum on the battlefield. But when you drop a bomb, you need to have a game plan beyond the bomb falling, and that would be a regional conversation. And can you see how Maliki can put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
I cannot. And that's why he has to agree to a transition.
I would not send $1 to Iraq. I would not send one soldier to Iraq, one airman to Iraq, until we understand over the arc of time, Maliki's got to go. I've been there more times than I can count. Maliki did some good things on his watch, but he has become a political leader that cannot bring the country together. But that, to me, is a concern that's addressed after you stop the momentum on the battlefield. Senator McCain, do you believe it's still possible that the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shias that we know fairly well can regroup and reconcile with themselves if we act decisively?
I'm totally confident that they can. That is what the country was held together for long periods of time, but we obviously can't. Could I ask my colleague, I began, before you arrived, talking about this business of that the allegations that
yes.
somehow that it's the Iraqis' fault that we didn't leave a residual force in Iraq. And I went through our meetings with Maliki, with Barzani, with Alawi, how they were all committed to maintaining residual force. Could you just, for the record, recount the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing where you directly
sure.
Questioned General Dempsey about this entire issue after we had withdrawn?
Yes, I'll be glad to, and just put it in context. In 2008, we signed a strategic framework agreement. It was envisioned that we would negotiate a follow-on force with advisors, some special forces units to secure our nation as well as to protect our gains. In the process of trying to get the Iraqis on board, Hillary Clinton called me to ask if you and I think Senator Lieberman, maybe he didn't go, I can't remember, would go over there and talk to Barzani, to Alawi, and Maliki. And we said, sure, we'd be glad to. Here's what I found. I found in the meeting with Prime Minister Maliki, who was very open-minded about a follow-on force. Barzani said, I'll take 250,000 Americans. That was never a doubt about where the Kurds were at. Alawi understood, the Sunnis understood the need for a follow-on force. It really was about the Shia politics. After we got back, Maliki said, if the other groups will do it, I will do it. But he says, what kind of force are you talking about, Senator Graham? Ambassador Jeffries.
This wasn't a meeting in Baghdad.
This was a meeting in his office. He asked me, what kind of force are you talking about? I turned to General Austin and Ambassador Jeffries, and I asked them, what's the number? Answer the Prime Minister's question. We're still working on that. And the Prime Minister looked at me and said something to the fact, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to be agreeing to. We come back to Washington, we go to the Vice President's house, we talk to Mr. Donlan saying they need a number. Sometime, and they said they would get back to us about the number. I'm still waiting on that phone call. During my questioning of General Dempsey about the follow-on force, I asked him, General Austin recommended somewhere in the 18 to 20,000 range. The Pentagon got down to 10, and below that they felt very uncomfortable. I asked him directly, did the number cascade down, or did the number go down because the Iraqis said, that's too many Americans, we don't want that many Americans on our soil? He said, no, sir, the numbers kept cascading down because the White House kept changing the number. So I want the record to reflect that in a meeting with the Prime Minister of Iraq, when he asked me how many troops we're talking about, we couldn't give him an answer, and I want the record to reflect the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said that the numbers went down and down and down, not because the Iraqis were saying no, because the White House kept lowering the number to the point that it got to be absurd. And we will prove that over time.
Well, fine, good. I see that our colleague from Florida is waiting. I think I'd like to have the senator from South Carolina summarize. The cost of inaction or doing nothing is the greatest cost we can incur. The situation on the battlefield is not only terrible, but the polarization of the different groups in Iraq is growing worse by the hour. We are seeing the resurgence of the old Shia militias that we had that thanks to David Petraeus, we had put down before. Iraq was largely under control thanks to David Petraeus, Ryan Crocker, and the surge in 2011. If we had left, and it's a fact, and if we had left that residual force behind, history would be very different. And I would add one other comment. We cannot ignore Syria in this situation. We have to understand that Syria is now part of this huge area, the size of the state of Indiana, which is governed by ISIS. Madam President, I yield the floor.